Spiritual famines and restorative communities. Naomi's bitter. Naomi is bitter because of the famine. She renames herself Mara because she cannot stand being called sweet thing anymore. I think many of our churches feel that they've been living during times of famine, and some of us are even bitter about how much things have changed in our churches over the years. Naomi's life at the beginning of the book of Ruth is defined by all of her losses, and her name reflects her experiences. My name is Tanya Sadagopan, a combination of American and Indian names. I'm likely to be the first Reverend Sadagopan in all the world, because you see, Sadagopan is a Hindu name given to me by my husband's family. Like many Americans these days, my life is a reflection of many cultures, traditions, and worldviews. My ministry is found at the crossroads of faith and culture. I live at the borderlands every day. Not too long ago, I spent a week vacationing in California. I saw the terrible 3-year drought firsthand as we crossed over the bridge to Pacific Beach. We crossed over mud and a little bit of marshlands. This very, very long bridge used to be all water. Certainly, there is a drought in California beyond all measure. Sitting with friends over dinner that night, they shared with me that the tech industry at this time is booming at pre-Y2K levels. That is before the turn into the year 2000. And that California's resources are being drained at a high level like never before. So the resources that are being drained are high and the available resources is very low. This, my friends, is the definition of stress and overconsumption. Just like California, people in India know all about water conservation. In India, just because you have a light switch doesn't mean that the lights are going to go on when you turn it on. Just because you have a faucet doesn't mean water is going to come out of it when you turn the handle. They have mandatory water rationing, where the water is turned on for 1 hour a day. And sometimes that 1 hour a day is completely unpredictable. What if you're not home when the water's turned on for that 1 hour? Guess what? You now have to go over to that nosy neighbor that you don't like very much and ask them if they collected any water for you. And you know what? She did. She knows you don't like her and she doesn't like you very much, but she collected 4 extra buckets than the normal day's usage because she knew that you were having guests. You see, in India, they understand that community is key for survival. They rely on one another, they work together with one another, and it doesn't matter to them if they agree, if they like each other, or even if they're voting for the same candidate. That's the way it is in India. January will mark the 10-year anniversary of my ordination. In the 10 years of ministry, I've seen a whole variety of churches in various denominations and various sizes go through spiritual famines. Congregations downsizing along with their staff and their budgets, people drifting away from the church because the theology and practice of the church no longer fit the questions of the day. You see, the message that we get from the media about what it means to be Christian in the world is turning people away from God and the church in droves, because that's not who we know ourselves to be. In so many ways, the church in general failed to keep up with the changing landscape of our lives. You see, we have people in our lives who are a variety of cultures and beliefs and ideas within their own body because their parents have come from all over the world. We have children who have married folks from Belize, from Mexico, from countries in Africa, from India in my case. And we're working with people who come from around the world and who share in different faiths, and some folks who don't consider themselves to be faithful to any religion at all. If the church can't adapt in that environment, then the church will die. You see, those people who drifted away are, some of them, still spiritual. They crave something deeper, and when the church couldn't answer their questions, they went seeking for answers outside of the walls of the church. And those are the ones who are committed. Those are the ones who said, I'm not going to give up on my spirituality. They began to look elsewhere, and yet in the church, far too often, what have we done? We have done what Naomi did at the beginning of Ruth. We have lamented far too long. There's 3 churches I'd like to share with you about, because what's interesting is while I served churches who were living through spiritual famines of one kind or another, the interesting thing is that while living through those spiritual famines, some of the most innovative ministries came out of those churches. The first church is a small church with membership under 40. In Fowler, Indiana, they were figuring out how to be church. They lost their full-time pastor, they went to a half-time pastor, and they weren't sure if they were going to be able to stick together in this rural community. But they discovered something about their community. There was a lot of people in their community who were secretly hiding the fact that people in their family were incarcerated. They didn't want anybody to know because they were ashamed. The minister found out, and I was a student minister at the time, and we brought Kairos Outside, which is a prison ministry, to that church. And that whole group of 40 people came together and started working towards bringing healing to the families who were ashamed of what had happened to a member in their life. Baking cookies, creating conversations, workshops, and attending these special events for the families of the people who were incarcerated. The church was transformed, and they learned that they were not a small church, they were a mighty church with mighty ministries. Church 2. This is a church of about 100 in a very small building that was around, that had little room for classrooms and little space to do anything but worship and have fellowship. Right as I came as their pastor, they did the unthinkable. They ripped out the pews. Can you imagine? They ripped out the pews and they replaced them with cushioned chairs. They became the spot for innovation and presentation and small group work and little circles and tables. They could do anything in their sanctuary. You see, limited space got transformed into a creative use of space. That is an entrepreneurial church, and another way to look at our buildings. Church 3. This is a large church with over 800 members. They had 5 worship services, each one distinct and different, contemporary, and 8 o'clock in the morning, contemplative. They had a Saturday service. They had the traditional service. They had so many services they didn't know what to do. And do you know what? They did not know each other. They were going in 5 different directions and nobody ever talked to anybody, and they felt like 5 little churches, all of them declining in membership and participation. So what that church did, and I was one of their pastors there, is we ended all 5 worship services and we created 2 distinct worship services with a fellowship hour in between. And what happened next was amazing. They started seeing each other and crossing paths during fellowship and talking to each other. And the church came to understand that relationships are important for understanding who we are as a community of faith. This community transformed itself by shifting its schedule. Where have we been looking? What is our focus as the larger church, what have we been paying attention to? What have we been measuring? Well, I'd like to say we're measuring the 3 B's. We are measuring buildings. We know how to take care of buildings. We know how to pay for buildings. We know how to sit in buildings and worship in buildings. But what if maintaining our buildings and building them and needing them isn't enough? The second thing we know how to do is we know how to manage budgets. We know how to write them, we know how to fund them, we know how to talk about them, we know when our budgets are bigger than our wallet, and we know how to lament about that. But what if that focus isn't enough for taking us into the next 500 years of the church? We know how to do stewardship campaigns, capital campaigns, and annual giving. The third thing we measure is bodies. We know how to count the number of people who sit in the pews. In fact, I've already been told how many bodies are in the pews this morning. We are so good at it. We have a team of people every Sunday who know how to count how many people are sitting in our pews. But does that, any of this, measure the impact that this congregation and other congregations have in the world? I don't think we're measuring the real value of the church, because when we focus on budgets, buildings, and bodies, and we get the numbers that we get, we experience the sense of decline, and we're not enough, and we're not good enough, and we feel that things are scarce, money is scarce. We are scarce, we are not enough. And so we lament, like Naomi. Christianity Today published this image after a study in 1997 that was revised in 2009 from the University of Pennsylvania, because they wanted to ask this question about what's a church really worth. What's a church really worth? What is the impact of the church on a community? They wanted to know how it is, who we are, and what we do makes a difference. They found out an initial estimate of the value of a church like ours, in the middle of a community like ours, was valued at, guess how much? Guess. The impact annually on the community. In dollars. $500,000. Without that church there, the community would be missing $500,000 worth of services per year. Except for when they went back and revised it, they realized that was very off. They redid their figures and they looked at the ministries of each thing that the churches did, and they figured out that actually a better estimate of the annual impact on any given community from any church is $6 million. That was 10 times the budget of that particular congregation. Do you know the budget here? Times that times 10. And that gives you a hint at the impact that this church is already having in the community. I'm new to Wisconsin. My ministry has taken place all over the Chicago landscape, and one of the things that I got to do was lead a conference on economic justice. And we had some cool folks there. We had Sister Simone Campbell from Nuns on the Bus. Some of you know Sister Simone Campbell. We also had the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, one of our esteemed ministers in the United Church of Christ. Let me tell you, Sister Simone Campbell and Otis Moss have no problem speaking out loud about their faith. But what Reverend Franz Rieger told me about folks up here in Wisconsin is that we don't like to talk very much out loud about our faith or about much at all. We're a humble folk. We hail from humble beginnings. Over in Europe, we kind of keep things to ourselves. That puritanical nature of don't boast is kind of in our cells for generations. And so the church has decided that we shouldn't tell anybody what we're doing or who we are, because after all, people will know we're Christian by how we love, right? They'll know that because we love others, that we're doing it because of our faith. Guess what? People don't know why we do what we do if it's because of our faith, unless we tell tell them and share with them why we do what we do. You see, in Wisconsin, we have a little bit of an inferiority complex, and it's time for us to realize that who we are and what we've been doing as a church is actually pretty awesome. We're doing some great things, and it's time the community finds out that we are actually a church of value. At the annual meeting, our featured speaker was Cameron Trimble. Reverend Cameron Trimble is from the Center for Progressive Renewal, and she stated this fact over and over again. In communities where we have UCC churches, the quality of life goes up. In communities where we have UCC churches, the quality of life automatically just goes up. I want you to think about that for a minute. The community improves where we have churches, so our churches are making an impact. Maybe it's time to shift our focus. How do we do that? What should we measure if we're not measuring buildings, bodies, and budgets? Maybe we need to shift our conversations from dealing with buildings to managing conversations. What if we were paying attention to the number of conversations we had about God or faith in the world outside of these walls? What if we shifted our focus from internal budgets to how we can make a difference extending our giving out into the community in our outreach? What if we shifted our focus from measuring the bodies on Sunday morning to measuring the number of people's lives who we touch? Measuring the number of people's lives who we touch is something that here at Janesville UCC we are already deeply engaged in. I hear you arguing about how do we measure the little library and how many lives it touches. How do we measure Christian education programming and how many lives it touches? How do we measure the lives we touch when we go out into the community and do other kinds of innovative things? That is a question worth focusing on. You see, our impact might go from a few hundred a year to a few thousand if we but change the question that we're asking. Because when you change your focus, when you change your question, you're going to see something different. And you might do something different too. As we shift who we are and who we're being into a congregation, into a community that's connected to its people, we come to understand that our impact is in partnership with God and the community all along. The book of Ruth starts with a famine. It's only like 3 or 4 lines. The rest of the book is about restoring the community. It's time the church stopped focusing and lamenting on what we've lost. It's time that the church stops focusing on how things have changed. In fact, it's time for the church to declare that the famine is over. The famine is over. If we are going to thrive in the current community and landscape of our world today, we've got to get innovative, collaborative. We have to be inspired by ourselves and start sharing what's great about our community with the church and sharing what's great about the church with our community. What's really awesome in the book of Ruth is everybody gets involved in the transformation process. The women, the men, the elders. Naomi tells Ruth to go to the threshing floor and uncover, wink, wink, Boaz's feet. And if you don't know what that means, you need to ask somebody because it's funny. Naomi, the old woman who's lamenting, got innovative and creative. Ruth went and gleaned in the field. Boaz, the well-resourced elder in the community, got creative and redefined what it meant to redeem a piece of land, could also restore a woman to her livelihood. That's us. That's our church. That's churches across Wisconsin. Some of us are like Naomi, we're still lamenting, and we need the women to help listen to our story so we can be innovative and get outside of that. Some of us are like Boaz, we're large, well-resourced, innovative churches already shifted our focus. We need to get out there and support other congregations in catching the vision of what it means to be the church in the world today. And some of our congregations are somewhere in the middle. How can we as the larger church work together for good with our communities? How we understand church will change. It won't just look like Sunday mornings in pews. It'll look like being out at Fourth Ward Park with nuns on the bus saying we care that our budgets are faith documents. It'll look differently to each community because we'll be thinking innovatively about our community. In Jeremiah, it says, "Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." That's the whole gig right there. If you seek the welfare of the community and the city that you're in, then the Lord will bless us and we will find our own welfare. And just in case we're nervous about that, just in case we're nervous about getting out into the community and talking to people who are different, God continues and says, "For surely I know the plans I have for you, the church, plans for your welfare and not harm, to give you a future and a hope." God is partnering with us, but we got to take those first steps. We've got to work with God on this project. It's time to be the church inside and out. You see, most of us, including right here at Janesville UCC, when we talk about our church or think about our church, we advertise our church like this: the facade in our website, on our business cards, everything you look at, you'll know where to find us, because when you come inside, then you're going to know all about our church. We just need you to come inside the building, because that's where the church happens. What if we need to shift our focus and we got to think outside of the walls and say, hey, we need to be the church inside and outside the building? Here in this photo you can see that we've got the Be the Church sign outside of our education wing. But wait, maybe even that's not enough. You see, we're at a crossroads. The church in general is at a crossroads. We have to figure out who we are, whose we are, and how we're going to be that for the next 500 years. Do you know that we're celebrating the 500-year anniversary of the Reformation? We have a couple of people I know for sure who know it because they just went to Germany. 500 years is being celebrated next year. Is the church going to stick around for another 500 years? Not if we don't get innovative. Not if we don't understand that our welfare is tied to the welfare of our city and our communities across this nation and across this world. We're at a crossroads, and it's time for us to take action to get disorganized. I have to tell you, I spent some time in a stained glass window making class, and there was a woman I was talking to, and she found out I was a pastor, and she said, I'm spiritual, very, very spiritual, but I do not believe in organized religion. I am spiritual but not religious, basically, is what she was saying. And I wholeheartedly agree. I don't think we should believe in organized religion either. I think it's time we got disorganized. Right? And started thinking new ways of being church in the world. We need to create a new vision of what it means to be church in our communities and beyond. This image that I share with you now comes from a conversation around faith formation here in this church. We had 5 young students who were mostly quiet, who weren't sure about this whole faith formation thing, but one that was very, very quiet. He wasn't sure that this was the right thing for him at all. But when I told all 5 of them they needed to create their own project, he decided he would get out his drone and fly it up and take aerial photos of the church. The quietest one in the bunch had the most impact on our congregation. Maybe Wisconsin, in all our quietness, In all our inferiority complexes, in all our humility and humbleness, in all of our don't speak out about our faith lest people might think you're haughty. Maybe Wisconsin, just like this confirmand, is the one to make all the difference in our country and in our world. You see, it's time for us to create a new vision for being the church in the world. And guess what? We, the United Church of Christ, we, the UCC folks, we, the folks who say that God is still speaking, we who say that all are welcome no matter where you are in your spiritual journey, maybe our congregation and our denomination is exactly what the world is waiting for. Amen.